It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Banashree Banarjee is an architect, urban planner, researcher, and teacher. She works as an independent consultant and as a senior housing and urban management expert at the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies, Rotterdam. She has practiced and written extensively on participatory planning and improvement of housing environments in several Asian cities. Dr. Meera Baindur is a philosopher and has wide-ranging interests in the areas of Indian philosophy and environmental humanities. She is an associate professor and program head for India Studies at the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences in RP University, Bangalore. Her current research is around lived concepts of Indian philosophy, including place, aesthetics, decoloniality, ecofeminism, and gender issues. Our moderator for this afternoon's discussion is Kiran Keswani. Kiran is the co-founder of Everyday City Lab, which focuses on design, research, and teaching on public spaces. She's been researching Ashwath Kattes as a neighborhood community space since 2015, and we have an exhibition on this, which is on display in the driveway. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I want to begin by thanking IHS and especially thanking Asha and Ishani for facilitating both the panel discussion as well as the exhibition. It's been, they've been very, very supportive, so thank you. And of course, thanks to our panelists for agreeing to be a part of this panel. I thought it would be nice to start with, asking the why question, as in why did we want to talk about trees, communities, and public spaces? I think in this post-pandemic scenario, everybody is talking about it, so it's sort of a given. But nevertheless, I think all of us also have our personal reasons for wanting to talk about it, and that's what we are going to share here. My own reason to sort of think about trees and how they shape public space, or how there is this relation between nature and people within our cities has actually started. This work started for us at the Everyday City Lab with looking at people tree shrines, or Ashwath Kattes as they're called in Bangalore. And we started to think about this only because there was a group of young people who had wanted to set up a Bangalore Tree Festival, which happened 2-3 years in a row. The first one was in 2014 and then 15. And we, thanks to this young group of people who had 100 volunteers for the festival, there was a lot of positivity around trees. It was already the time when trees were being cut in Bangalore for metro construction, but they had decided that rather than belong to the groups that protest, they were going to instead bring people together to celebrate trees. And I've been sort of ever grateful to this group of people, the core team of Nerulu, because if it weren't for them, my own interest in Ashwath Kattes would not have started. And I think, over the years, every year we have done a little bit more, little bit more, little bit more. It's been really small steps. This time round, we thought that, there's already been this realization that no matter what we are doing, we don't understand how people from other disciplines are thinking about it. So I come from the urban design discipline, and it has been, this feeling that we are looking at it very narrowly. And so it was this thought that should we not, to get a better understanding, should we not start having multidisciplinary conversations? And so this is one of those multidisciplinary conversations. As you know from the introductions, we have got Banashree, who's an urban planner, and Meera, who's an environmental philosopher. We are really looking forward to see, this common discussions, what they lead to. And, just to share with you all, of course, behind the scenes, what happens before a panel discussion, you meet over a Zoom call, these days, and then you talk about what you might discuss at the panel. So we have had that, and it went in a very interesting way, and we almost thought we were done with the panel, but I guess there was no audience, so we were just talking to each other. So here, I think the new variable is that we have all of you here, and we are hoping that you will raise some questions at the end, you will have some comments, and you will bring something of your own to this conversation. I also want to take this opportunity to talk about why a panel discussion when we are talking about trees and we are talking about nature in the city. And I think that especially because we are talking in the IIHS campus, in a place like IIHS, and also because of all our backgrounds, I think while there are some people who are on the ground fighting for nature conservation, saying that do not cut trees, or there are others who are saying all we are going to do is go and plant trees. And there's a range of people out there who are making different kinds of efforts, right? There are people in the public health sector who are talking about things. There are people in climate change who are talking about things. And I think in the teaching learning space that IIHS is, and our backgrounds are, it's also important to have just some conversation. It may seem very simplistic. It may seem like, we are not being action-oriented here. But these conversations are important, I think, because in these conversations, you not only get to listen to the stories and the experiences that others have had in that space, but I think what sometimes also happens, and we are hoping that that will happen today, is that through these conversations amongst ourselves, these little thought experiments might happen. And that is what we'd like to see. And you might have that thought experiment for yourself. You might take it back home with you, or you might share it with us at the end of this discussion. So we'll start with that. And I'd like to start by asking our panelists how their own background and work is related to this topic of trees communities. So Meera, would you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kiran. Thank you, IHS, for giving this opportunity. And Kiran, thank you for inviting me. I'm an old Bangalorean, studied here and was born and brought up in Bangalore. Moved away for quite a bit of time, but also was one of the second or third batches of environmental science in St. Joseph's College, which was one of those new subjects back in the 80s. So participated in a lot of tree cutting protests as a student. Narmada Bachao Andolan was going on. Anti-Kaiga marches were going on. So I got into this group of activists, student activists. And so my own background with trees comes from the fact that we also did, in school, we did this tree planting drives. I can drive by so many places, roads in Rajajnagar, where 15 to 20 trees were actually planted by my hand. So I have these heritage trees, like I planted that. There's a tree in St. Joseph's also that I planted that is now taller than me. Very huge it is now. So there's a very personal connection with nature that I seem to have had, and that moved me from, fighting for trees and being related to trees, which was very organic for me, rather than something I made up and said, I must fight for the environment and all. It was more organic, like trees should not be cut, they are living beings. And so I moved towards a sort of a spiritual kinship, a philosophical understanding of nature, which kind of led to where I am as an environmental philosopher rather than a conservationist or in the biological field. So my own relationship to trees has been very local and very land-based. It's a very real thing for me. It's not something that is there in the books. It's like this tree, I saved this tree from being cut. Or this tree was cut halfway. This was a tree that was there in Hebbal Lake. So there's a very personal, each tree is like a member or a friend. Like I would relate to my students that way. This is my first batch. And so I have all this relationship with students. But so my trees are also sort of personally related. And once I moved into academics, once I did my PhD, it has taken on a different, sort of, let's say, a foundational, not a theoretical, but a foundational. Why do we love trees? Why are we related to them? How are people related to them? And at the core of this is always this kind of resignation or frustration or this wanting to make people love nature. It's not about people, how do you change people's attitudes? So that has been the force. And for me, trees are the most visible ways in which you can point and say nature, particularly in an urban area, right? And see one tree is there and I'll say, this is a tree. Look in front of your house, nature. So I think that is my relationship, and that's kind of the background.
Yeah, I just want to add here, this is a really interesting point that, Meera, you're pointing out that tree is right there. In fact, I remember reading when we were doing some research initially on the Ashwatkatte, there is this, book that talks about the tree. So of course, we all understand that, there is a very nice intersection of religion and ecology when you look at these people tree shrines, right? Religion became a way for preserving biodiversity. And they say that the neighborhood tree was the easiest embodiment of the deity, that you could tell people that, you just pray there, right? So it became very easy. And also it was a time, of course, especially in the rural areas where you had, natural calamities, which people felt helpless about. So this tree right there became very important. Yeah. So, Banashree, would you like to share your own connection with trees, communities, and your experiences?
Hey, thanks to IIHS, and thank you, Kiran, for having me on this panel. It's also nice to meet Meera for the first time on the Zoom call, and our association with trees are sort of complementary. Now, I wear two hats as far as trees is concerned. I'm the daughter of a forest officer. So I've sort of grown up with trees and nature right through. So even as a child of 5, I could recite the botanical names of trees and stuff like that. So, which I think my parents taught me to keep me busy and out of mischief. And the other part of me is an urban planner. And I've been working mostly on housing, and housing basically related to poor people. And then you get to see how divided our cities are in terms of access to open space, in terms of access to nature, and the very people who've come from villages to cities do not have parks to go to, or again revive their memories of the village by planting trees within their informal settlements. That is one part. The other part is that when looking at housing environments, I've always sort of looked at the publics, yeah? The streets, the parks, the trees, and open spaces, which add value to housing environments. And there, actually, I've had an opportunity to support activist groups as a planner to actually go through campaigns and court cases, basically and I was also part of a court case of road widening where in Delhi, where the contractor first started by chopping off trees, yeah? Even before the alignment was fixed. Yeah? And then they were, and overnight the trees disappeared and all that. So then there were these activists who got into counting trees and things like that. So because I was a planner, I could access the various things of whether there was a road alignment, what had been planned in the master plan, how should people go about knocking the doors of institutions to see that they actually respond. But the only thing that we found there was that, Delhi being Delhi, and there are so many institutions who are involved in this whole thing of, especially when a road comes. You have the Public Works Department, yeah, which is making the road. You have the Forest Department, which is, saying that no, trees should be counted and you should not fell them. And even if you have to, you should have compensatory plantation. And then there was the Delhi Development Authority, who is actually who has a particular wing for design of roads and streets, which were then guiding how this whole design should be, and everything that any institution in Delhi does on roads should actually be approved by them. Yeah. Then the fourth thing was the landowning agency, which is the Municipal Corporation of Delhi. So it was a big, big jumble, and nobody was, taking a stand. We went to the Lieutenant Governor that time, and who actually makes the decisions around Delhi Development Authority. We went to the Chief Minister, we went to the PWD Minister, everybody. Finally, this thing had to go to court. And there, we discovered that there are these many, first of all, the master plan provisions. Secondly, the guidelines for actually planting and maintaining trees, which Delhi Development Authority has. And then the Forest Department has various guidelines for pruning and prevention of cutting. And then you have the Trees Act. In Delhi, it was 92. In Bangalore, I think it's 76 or something like that. And the tree officer, who is the nodal officer to whom you should report. Now, the tree officer was totally overwhelmed with these figures because people report 1 or 2 trees being cut down. And here it was 800 trees. Yeah? So we got everybody together, and then the court case happened. So that for me was, and it was a very positive judgment, I must say. And so we can talk about it later, how it came about with the collaboration of everybody. But I could usefully contribute as an urban planner to this process. And then the activist group, they said, yes, we can hug trees, we can form these chains, we can get media support and all that, we can write letters and all that. But this help from a planner about knowing where to find which mandate of institution, hold them accountable for it, and actually put it into the court case was something which actually clinched the deal for us. Sorry? This is 2013 we started. This is in Vasant Kunj area in Delhi. And we got the judgment super quick, 2015. And also the court appointed Center for Science and Environment, Sunita Narayan, as the amicus curiae. Because they wanted to be informed of all the nitty-gritties. So it was historic in the sense that it was a positive judgment in favor of the citizens group, which had given this thing. Second thing, that it was very quick. Our courts giving a judgment in 2 years' time was just super quick in this whole thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think, for those of us who don't know how to go about something and who do want to sort of make a difference, knowing this can be useful. So do save your questions for Banashree till the end, just hold on. We had also, when we had our Zoom conversation, we had also talked about how we would, dwell a little bit about the post-pandemic scenario. And the reason being that I think there's no way we can now assume that we didn't all pass through it, right? And things have changed for all of us. But I think that one of the things, at least, that one of the questions that we are all asking ourselves, are we really destroying nature, or are we part of nature? It's still not, it's not the same thing in everybody's mind, right? For some people, nature is outside of ourselves, and for some, it is not. So here, I think I'm going to ask Meera, because Meera has some very interesting things to share on this front.
Thank you, Kiran. A part of, as I said, the foundational questions around nature, before we get into the actual going around and trying to save trees, we kind of look at why we want to do it for ourselves. Because I found that everybody who came in the, we used to be a part of a group called Hasiru Usiru, anti-metro tree cutting, anti-road widening tree cutting for the airport, anti-tree cutting for underpass construction, railway line. We had fight with the railways, and they were cutting trees. We had fights about cutting trees in absorption of Kaban Park and Lal Bagh, the reducing green spaces. We had problems with people cutting trees in front of shops in busy roads like Sampke Road or these main avenues. So every time when we gathered, there was a group of diverse individuals, and each of them had their own reason for being there. I mean, we were all together in what we wanted to do. We wanted to save trees. But when we looked at why, there were various different reasons. And similarly, so it was also true, as Banashree pointed out, for why they want to cut the trees. There were pro-development people. There were people saying, if we cut here, we'll plant there. It's okay. And there were also, because when I was younger, in the 80s, we were planting trees. By the way, Bangalore is not a tree shady area at all. The old Bangalore that I know from my childhood is Bayalu. It is completely like empty landscape of pasture lands, wetlands, rocky, maybe one or two of those thorny subabul trees type of thing, honges, and little villages and settlements which would have trees. Trees were always planted. If you look at the urban history of Bangalore, the tree planting happened, I think, in my lifetime. There was a forest officer, and I think they were distributing gulmohar trees. They were distributing, I remember the slogan also, "Ondon manege, ondon mara." One tree for one house. And they were giving away neem saplings. We would go, they would give us 10 saplings, and we'd just go and plant them in the side of the road. Dig a hole, plant, water. And in those days, thankfully, Bangalore was not that dry. There was enough rain, and we didn't have to actually water it except in... So all those little avenues and every layout, whether it was Rajajinagar, which was put out, or Jayanagar, JP Nagar, all the trees were planted. So that's why you find these lovely, similar trees. You'll find one road of cassia, one road of thing. So in that sense, these trees were not the ones that were being fought for. The trees that were being fought for are the trees planted during the Mysore Maharaja's time, like the ones in Malleshwaram. They're very old settlements. And along, of course, the airport road, right? That is one of the biggest, oldest shady avenues, which are ancient roads, they were probably. And so the whole connection that we as, let's say, we are all schizophrenic. There's one part of us that's very Indian, that's very decolonial, and the other part of us that is English educated and reading all these texts. So the decolonial part of it feels everything is Prakriti. We are related to nature as distant relatives. Trees are our distant, dur ke rishtedar, if you want to put it in English. Nentru, as we say, nam nentru. So you will relate to the tree like, so sometimes when you see a person hammering a nail in a tree, there's sort of a crunch that goes into your heart, like, what? It's a living being, right? So that, I think, is a kind of I am part of nature, not only part of nature, but nature is related to me, same family.
Meera, you also spoke about how someone in the city perceives nature and how someone in the rural area.
So in a city, in a concrete-filled area, the closest visible, as you said, the most in-your-face nature is a tree. We don't see grass, we don't see lawn, we don't see parks and plants and roses as nature. We see tree, which is basically an umbrella with leaves on top, as a very visible part of nature. I think it's so uncontrolled. I think that's what I was looking over the conversation. It's one thing that you can't control. You can make things with your rose bush, you can do things with everything, but this tree grows by itself. And then it becomes bigger than you are. And it says, I'm here. What will you do with me? It's so huge in our life. And also the way you access trees is, when it's young, maybe it needs shelter, but after that it starts to shelter you. So you get this whole parental kinship with the tree, right? And so that makes us feel. And when we see the tree as not ours, I spoke to you about a shopkeeper who said the tree in front of my thing is vastu-wise wrong for profits. So he cut the tree down because it's wrong for profits. There's some weird vastu person in Bangalore who's going around saying this. I wish I could find them. But that's what they said. And so they will cut the tree. Or shop front should be visible. Your nice window display should be visible to the people on the other side of the road. So a tree will block it. And there was another person who said that we walk on the pavement and bang our head into the trees. So these are people for whom nature is different. They are other, dusre log. So there's people for whom trees are rishtedar, and there are people for whom nature is other. And trees are the most visible other and rishtedar. I mean, the grass is equally nature. The grass growing in the middle of the median, that little plant that is growing inside the building, all that is also nature. But people relate to nature as trees. And that's why nobody fights. Sometimes I've seen people don't fight as much for wetlands and lakes as they do for trees. It's easier to gather people around trees because it's, I think it, as you said, it foregrounds nature. Even in the villages, I think. It foregrounds nature. And it is so independent. Kuch nahi kar sakte, hai to hai. Once it's grown, that's there. The only thing you can do is cut it down. Sometimes even when you cut it down, it will sprout up. So that power relationship, mother-father tree.
Yeah, I think, I'm sure that each of you have had also a chance either to experience some of these things yourself or to listen to stories from somebody in the family, right? We've all had that opportunity. While you're listening to our panelists, I think at the end, in the Q&A, if you'd also just like to share a story from your side, please feel free to do that. I'm just going to, while we started off this bit saying that, post-pandemic scenario, a few days ago, Banashree had shared this very interesting article that she wrote about cities post-pandemic, right? Cities and city planning. And there was a bit on open spaces there and how there is an adaptability that open spaces have, that public spaces have, that has come in very useful. So if you want to, Banashree, just dwell a bit on.
Yeah, actually, this pandemic, it brought out this whole thing that, urbanization has really changed the way that we live and see nature, all this concrete and things like that. And it's happened in the course of one generation for us Indians, yeah. And so how much of this kind of unlearning can we go back again and learn is a big question. But here, as far as urban planning is concerned, I mean, if we look historically, these pandemics, when they've happened, whether it was the plague in London or this, influenza epidemic in the United States, actually these have been kind of major lessons for urban planning. And planning and health have always been related, public health and planning, whether it's in terms of improving infrastructure or in terms of having what they called lung spaces, yeah? And especially it was considered very important where settlements are dense, yeah? You do need to have these kind of public open spaces where which then take care of the density. For example, now when the COVID pandemic hit, cities like Singapore, which are very, very dense cities in terms of density, were not affected as badly as the suburbs of the United States, which are really low density. And now that research is going on into what happened, of course it was the medical action and all that, and preventive actions. But what played a major part were these accessible open spaces to which people could go, and public spaces which were, not indoors, yeah, but outdoor spaces which people could still enjoy and keep themselves healthy even during a pandemic. And here we're talking about COVID, but then, it's not that, and these kinds of conditions in cities can breed a lot of other diseases, for which this whole thing of open space is very important. And you would see that in our cities, in the master plans, there's this whole hierarchy of open space, like from city forest to district parks and neighborhood parks to tot lots and playgrounds and everything. Yeah. So the logic of that is this access to healthy environments. Yeah. And that is what the relationship is. And the article that Kiran is talking about, there I was looking at how a city like Delhi or even Wuhan in China, they could very easily set up temporary facilities, yeah, for quarantine or treatment and things like that during COVID, because open spaces are flexible spaces, or even you would see that they're used for a number of things, like even apart from health and disease, for festivals, people to gather and things like that, which is very much part of the cultural milieu of this country, that having spaces where people can get together and celebrate. Yeah? So I think not only, and that also is part of this mental health kind of thing, if you like. So having open spaces is really paramount. And we saw the difference, like, for instance, you had these informal settlements who the only open space that they have access to is the street, probably. And that also narrow and congested. And other middle-class areas which are planned, like in Delhi, it's, they're very well planned. And you have a landscape division of the Delhi Development Authority, which actually has to look at the planting in each area, whether it's small parks, whether it's in front of the houses, whether it's on the streets. So it's all planned, and people actually have manuals which they actually have to follow for residential areas, and also looking at different regions, like if it's on the close to the river, then they use certain kinds of species. If it's on rocky land, then other species. So actually, from that point of view, the planned areas in Delhi are very well planned as far as trees and plantations are concerned. But this whole what Meera was talking about earlier is that people look at trees and plants differently. So you have these lovely ladies pouring acid in the roots of trees because they don't want the tree to cut off the sun in winter from their house, and stuff like that. So at night the maid goes and pours acid till the tree dies, and then they say, oh, it's a dangerous tree, it's going to fall on my thing, and ask the forest department to take it away. So it's, this whole thing of placemaking and investment on the greens has to really be followed up by what I call placekeeping. Yeah? And there, these kinds of awarenesses, partnerships, they become very important.
Anecdotally, I just want to add, when you talked about the pandemic and the plague, Malleshwaram and Jayanagar were designed post-plague in Bangalore. There's even a plague Mariamma temple in Shivajnagar. So the British time, they planned that the density was too much. So the whole planning of Malleshwaram, I think Janki Nair has a very detailed history of that. And it actually talks about how Malleshwaram, with its park spaces, some of the parks have been absorbed into schools, but it still has some park spaces. And Jayanagar, these were designed with this. The other interesting park space that happened in Bangalore, especially in new areas like Rajanagar, is because of the high tension lines. It's a very interesting thing that when they laid the high tension line, there was a rule that you can't build. So the entire Rajajinagar on the other side of the Cord Road, the whole area has got a high tension line which goes along till Nagsandra. And the entire area under that is a park, like a long continuous park. And finally, the other interesting thing also is that your Ashwath exhibition actually demonstrates the public space on streets, because the Ashwath then becomes the sacred tree, then becomes the accessible public greenery, and somehow those things have been surviving. Sometimes roads have taken weird turnings because of Ashwath Kattes.
Yeah, that's totally, I mean, I totally agree. You know, that they seem to work as religious spaces, but in the contemporary context, we are finding that they're working quite well as social spaces. But as, you know, sort of staying with the pandemic thought just for a little bit longer, between the lockdowns, you know, we were also just sitting, not having much to do, and so we would send out an intern or two to go and check what's happening at the Ashwath Kattes in the city. And we were curious, you know, are people still frequenting them, or are they completely deserted? And we found that they were being used quite extensively. So it surprised us, because we all know that, you know, our stepping out into the streets had gone down. But and in sort of small interview sessions, talking to people at the Katte at that time, we found that people saying that, no, this is out in the open, and then we are sitting again under the people, the neem tree is there, this is safe. That was one. And of course, the platform was there. There was this one particular Katte, I remember, where, you know, there was an auto rickshaw driver who had lost who had sort of completely, his business had collapsed during the pandemic. So he had started to park his auto rickshaw there because nobody could stop him from doing that. And we've also, of course, seen, which is, you know, you might see a few pictures on the panels there, that there's a lot of informal vending that happens around these Ashwath Kattes. But auto rickshaw guys, so it's a space that is accessible. And as Banashree has shared, that, you know, there is this these green open spaces, small green open spaces, which become both because of their ecological significance, they provide that physical well-being, but because they act as social spaces, they are also helping in the mental well-being, right? And our realization for this after the pandemic has been super high, that we really need these at the neighborhood level, at every neighborhood, a place where you don't have to get into a car and go to another park 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers away to do your morning walk, right? That you have something right there, accessible, something that does not have a boundary, something that is not sort of bound by a temple wall. Right? So, and we've also talked about how they become third spaces for women. So from that, coming to this relation of women and Ashwath Kattes, I don't know, Meera, if you'd like to say something on that front.
Yeah. Drawing from what I know of Kiran's work, a lot of women go for religious functions. And in my own experience of, let us say, the sacred tree, basically they will say it's a sacred grove, but it's usually 1 or 2 trees. It's usually neem and this, and sometimes there's one more tree. So a lot of this is tied to women utilizing these, as from your research, utilizing these religious excuse to hang out, as she pointed out in her research. But also sometimes I've also seen that we were making a distinction between the Somberi Katte and the Ashwath Katte. The Somberi Katte is where men gather and they kind of have this political conversation or conversation of the village. So the Ashwath Katte sometimes gets taken over by men. And the women come at or maybe the time period that women can go and visit this Ashwath Katte and do their walk around, because it removes, it gives you pregnant, it makes you pregnant. So that is the main thing. Or sometimes it's like a wish fulfilling tree sometimes, or you have to worship the Naga statues of the Ashwath Katte. So then what happens is the women have an access, they have to give an excuse to occupy that space. Men don't have an excuse, they can just hang out. And so when the men are occupying it, the women feel awkward unless they are saying, move away, I have to do this puja. And then the men will move away. Otherwise, the public access is always that. And that also brings me to the other, I remember we talking about this. Trees were always climbable for me. And now trees are no longer, my favorite spot was on the Goa tree. I used to read Enid Blyton books on top of the tree. It was shady, nice. And nobody told me, the thing was, don't climb a tree, you'll fall down. It wasn't that don't climb a tree, it's not allowed. Right? And now with the kind of new rules about trees and not touching trees and staying off the grass, and there is no way to sensually experience a tree. And essentially experience nature. It's like that from a multisensorial experience of plucking your neighbor's mango leaves in the middle of the night for your torna, but for your religious function, borrowing neem trees, drumstick harvest, and everybody sharing, everybody will have drumstick sambar on the neighborhood. So that kind of relationship to a kind of a multi-use public access to the tree itself as an entity, to where now it's just become visual. It's a photograph. It's just, so even trees that go dry are not considered to be access. And also I think the first part of that non-accessible tree I remember is the sandalwood trees in Bangalore. If you had a sandalwood tree in your house, it belongs to the government, it doesn't belong to you. So by mistake, you cut one small branch, some neighbor will complain and the forest department will be at your door, finding you. I know in Jayanti Apartments, Bangalore, Malleshwaram, there's a sandalwood tree. And there was a police fellow put there in the apartment, which made the apartment owners very uncomfortable. Because that fellow was guarding a tree in their apartment, it belonged to the government. So there's a private space and there's a sandalwood tree, which is sort of government property. It's not public also. It's public inaccessible. So this whole access to the tree, coming down to the new rules in Cubbon Park, right? Which is now we are all dealing with. So
yeah, sure.
Well, talking about this women and access to this thing. So I had the good fortune to work on this Green Hyderabad project. Yeah? So the Green Hyderabad project consisted of rejuvenation of lakes and a whole lot of greening of the city. And it's, as you know, Hyderabad is a semi-arid area. So things don't grow easily there. But the Greater Hyderabad Urban Development Authority has a full-fledged forestry department in it. Yeah? And so I was working with them on this project. And one of the things with relation to women, one of the things that they had was to convert these dumping grounds in the old city into tree parks and parks itself. So the whole thing was cleaned up and things like that. And you have these very conservative families staying there. It was mostly a Muslim area, where women were not allowed to go out beyond a certain neighborhood. And so they always, if they went to the parks in the city, they always had to be accompanied by menfolk. Yeah? But creation of these little open spaces meant that women could actually go there. That was one thing. Second thing is that they were all very stinky places. People were throwing garbage, like you know what happens in our cities. There's an empty plot and people start throwing garbage there. So what the project did is that they actually negotiated with all the people who have empty plots and then said, you know, took sort of permission to plant trees in on their plots, with the condition that if they had to build, then they would not be fined for cutting the trees. Yeah? That was one thing. Second thing was that a lot of leftover spaces and all got converted into nice, tree-lined paths with trees and things. Then the women, they got together and they started demanding special timings for themselves. Yeah? So in the old city of Hyderabad, if you've been there recently, all these parks have women's timings. So, and And then they entrusted the upkeep of these parks to the neighborhood associations, which were actually formed around this open space. And they get some amount of money from the government. They put in their own money. And you can see that this open space then becomes not only something for the women to get together, and others also, kids and things like that at different times of the day. But it's like, and then, young people set up open air gyms and things like that. So throughout the day, it gets used. But it also worked as a way of bringing communities together who jointly take action about maintaining the open space, which they consider their area. So that was a very good thing. Now, once I'm on this Green Hyderabad project, let me go to, so they had several types of activities around tree plantation. One was this, and this was mainly tree parks, because what they said is that it's difficult to maintain grass and things like that. And so you have trees and bushes. These were what was happening. The second thing was these institutional forests. There's a lot of barren land, and sometimes they actually had to blast rocks to make holes and put soil in it and generate trees and everything. So Hyderabad has these huge institutional campuses, so tree planting there. So you have the BHAL factory, which calls itself a factory within a forest because of this project. The third thing that they did was to have peri-urban forests, where the local people are, it's this whole area between rural, urban, where a lot of people still survive through dairying and rearing sheep and things like that. So access to the forests for all these communities, and they were allowed to grow fodder there, harvest the fodder, but not leave their cattle in the forest, but take the fodder and take it to their stalls and put it there. They also had usufruct rights over the non-timber part of the forest produce, whether it was fruit or leaves and things like that. So it's this giving people a stake in the whole thing, which actually works. And then they divided the whole area of the peri-urban forests with communities. So it's in their interest to see that encroachment doesn't happen, and because they get an advantage out of it. The other thing that they did was to what they call homestead nurseries, which were actually anybody who wanted to rear nurseries. They were given plants, and seeds. So you have, even in the slums, in very small spaces, you had women who were doing things on the rooftop and on the along the street and things. And then this development authority was buying back these things then to plant in the parks which are there in the city. So that way, creating, interest, I don't know whether this altruistic thing of love for nature happens automatically, but this was a very definite strategy to create a stake in the whole thing, where people would actually be interested in safeguarding and maintaining the greens in the city.
Yeah, and that is really, fantastic. I think, we have had some very interesting, we've had stories and recommendations and best practices that we have heard from both our panelists. Now I think we are going to ask if any of you would like to share a story from which is related to the topic, or you have questions. Feel free.
I loved what you said, that nature has become a photograph. I mean, I went to BIC and they were having this so-called nature event. And all it was photographs, you know, I mean, competition, you win this, you win that. But nobody actually understood what the tree is. Nobody actually liked the tree. Nobody related to it. So that's really wonderful what you said. And that's what has happened in this digital world. We have digitized this tactical institution that we should actually love and touch and, you know, sit under and breathe. And I loved the pandemic because I could smell the trees. I'm one person who's bloody happy that there was a lockdown. I mean, however strange it may sound.
When we were having the Zoom call, we were talking about soil and concrete. Like there are these old way, like I am in an old RVC campus. It's basically all mud. And then there are trees. And the concrete is only in between the soil. But there are new campuses where everything is concrete and the tree is a hole. Like there's a little bit of soil. So soil on concrete versus concrete on soil. So it kind of tells you about the kind of planning that is being done.
Hello, I'm Akshay. Actually, I'm preparing for civil service examination UPSC. You said that there are two types of people who feel that nature is a part of them, and another type of people who doesn't feel nature is part of them. So how can we inject awareness about those environment, about environment into those people who are feel that environment is not part of them?
So there is a subject called eco-psychology, which I studied because I wanted to do what you said. So two things I've come across. One is our tradition, right? We often dismiss rituals, puja and all those things, as old-fashioned, pre-modern things. But what happens in a ritual? Supposing there's a wedding in the family, you suddenly remember this person is there. Suddenly some third cousin, twice removed, suddenly during the wedding you'll remember, oh, he's there, he's marrying this person from this. So you get aware and that person becomes foreground. Otherwise nature is background. It's like this, it's always there, but nobody's noticing it. So foregrounding nature happens through rituals. So when you do a puja for the lake that is overflowing, you'll have one pandit and everyone will gather and that fellow chief minister will come and put that lamp and everything inside it. Everybody remembers there's a Sankey tank. Otherwise, Sankey tank is forgotten. When you marry Ashwath Mara to a neem tree, it's a peculiar thing. What two trees are marrying each other. But it brings the fact that, hey, this tree is there. Otherwise, you lose idea. Suddenly you realize a coconut tree is there when you want to put a banner. Array, this tree is nice. So the annual reminder, so festivals like Vana Mahotsava or tree festivals remind us that there are trees. And they are real things. Because the rituals don't involve photo. The rituals, you have to go to actual Sankey tank and stand there in the rain and do puja. So you realize that when suddenly you go to Hebbal Lake to do the puja and there's no lake, then you realize, oh, where's the water gone? Or there's sewage. So this thing is actually a kind of a attendance sheet for nature, if you want to call it. So I think that ritual, having people involved in this ritual, in the West, they tree hug. You go and hug a tree and teach people to hug a tree. I remember in St. Joseph's, we counted the trees in Kaban Park. All the kids counted. I'm sure every one of those trees that they were counting, we asked them to hug the tree and tie a rakhi in the trees. So those things were done in those days. So I think every child who experiences a tree, you have to start young. Unfortunately, as you said, some people, the generation loss is there. But that is one level. The other level is that while people can love trees, the people who are actually destroying trees are not these local people all the time. There are policies and planning. And that is where people like going to people who have the knowledge, involving urban planners, involving habitat planners, involving consultants groups. So two level. One is to attack it from the level of the policy people. Those people have to learn to hug trees. So I have to get Metro Corporation people to have a tree hugging event. It's possible. It's quite possible. You can say management program or something and sustainability program and have them hug trees. It's a subversive way, but at the level of us, if enough people hug trees, I think they won't be.
Yeah. So as Meera rightly says, there'll be, of course, individual efforts. If you want to personally do something, you can. But if you want to sort of gather people or reach out to, people like Banashree or people like Meera and say that, I want to do something more. Can I reach out to a wider circle of people? How do I do that? So I think that should help, right? Is there something one of you wants to share or, yeah?
So,
Yeah.
sorry. So we spoke about the relationship that we had with tree and how did it happen. So 3 incidents come to mind, or 3 specific examples. So one was the guava tree. I think the favorite escape for all children, as our parents can't climb the tree for sure. So that was one way. You do something or you want to get away from people, so you climb the tree. Second thing was the tree was our companion rebel, like jamun tree, you were forbidden, nahi charna hai, you will fall down. And I have cousins who've broken their limbs doing that. But it was, it was the forbidden fruit as well, right? So that was one. And I grew up under a huge imli tree. So we used to eat too much imli and, so much tamarind is not good for you in growing years. So obviously we will have a lot of it. So that way it was a companion rebel. And third thing which comes to mind is a beautician, so whenever you click a picture next to a tree, it automatically comes out looking much better, isn't it? So it is like you have a nice tree in the background and you can be, whatever fatehal, but the picture still looks awesome. So that's the reason I click all my pictures, even now, against the backdrop of a tree. That's the attempt, at least. So, and Banashree's, I just wanted to say that the name itself is Banashree. So it is like...
That's my forest department.
That was just so awesome when you were sharing your introduction. And I was like, okay, the forest department stamp is right there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I was just thinking as you were sharing one example after another that, probably we now need these new rituals to start getting formulated, and some of these things will help us formulate that. I remember many years ago, somewhere in 2014 at Shrishti, Rita here is from Shrishti school. At Shrishti, Deepak Srinivasan had said, let's do a workshop for our students on Ashwath Kattes. Actually, Deepak Srinivasan and Suresh Jairam, who was here, I think, yesterday, they were the first people who, were talking about Ashwath Kattes in the city, and they had a residency around it. I think they had invited some artists way back. And so he said, let's do this workshop. And I remember in the middle of the workshop, we went upstairs to do lunch, and I'm sure a lot of you know of or know Shabnam Veermani. She's very well known for her Kabir project. And she said, oh, what are you here for? And we said, we are doing this Ashwath Katte workshop. And she said, oh, how fascinating. So in the context of our modern lives, we are going to need some urban ritual, right? Because so many of us are not going to the katte to pray. And that thought sort of stayed that, okay, so as many of us, from one generation to another, this connect with religious rituals is going to go down. So what is going to be that new urban ritual that has to take its place so that nature conservation still happens, right? Something that we really need to think very deeply about. What should come in?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Vani.
Yeah, the thing I just want to mention is, when Sundarlal Bahuguna was instigating this tree hugging up in Garhwal by village women, a bunch of us as students, we went along over there. And then he said, it's not your business because you're not affected by it. Yeah, you can come and look as people, you can carry the message, but you have to be affected. Yeah, in order to be related with trees. He said, you hug, you are here for 24 hours, you hug this tree and you go back, it's great fun for you. But why don't you do it back where you live. Yeah. So I think that's the essence. Yeah. That you have to be part of this whole thing, or the tree has to be part of your life, and you don't have to go to, places all over the world to show solidarity and hug trees. And those days, of course, you didn't have social media. But now, of course, straight away, I mean, you give mileage to yourself by putting things in social media. And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you had a question, yeah.
Yeah, so there are 2 sharings and 2 questions. So my name is Aniruddha. I'm into placemaking also. I'm a designer. And Bangalore is my second home. And it's a common love story, like person coming from the outside, coming to Bangalore, falling in love with Bangalore. So the reasons for falling in love are in a way known, and there are many why people fall in love with a city like Bangalore. But for me, it's 2-3 things. So this is sharing. One is that when I came here, I come from Pune. Pune is my hometown. And when I came here, what I saw and appreciated is most of the roads had footpaths, They have pedestrian walkways. But those were not like really, probably afterwards I came to know that because of the topography of the Bangalore, that there are side drains which need to be there, stormwater drains, and upon that there are slabs which are laid. And those became footpath. But apart from that, I also dug in a bit, and that I got to know that people actually have gone into, pushing for the policy that we need to have footpaths for the streets. Here, people have fought for it. So that is the thing that first I appreciated when I came to Bangalore, that there is a huge coverage of walkways, at least, which are available. Many cities don't have it. There is a percentage sitting somewhere in the data. Probably it is 80% of the roads have footpaths. So that is first thing that I appreciated, and now it has increased. The respect for that particular feature has increased because of the tender sure design, that here the line of the tree is being utilized as a railing for the, or creating a space division between walkways and the roads. And that tree line is, there are a number of functions which are being played by that particular feature, and it's beautiful. It is nicely providing a differentiating line. People are not crossing it willingly, and also it adds to the aesthetics and all. So there are a number of good things about it. So that is first sharing. Second is about when I came here, it is also about the Ashwath Kattes that I appreciated. Ashwath Kattes and Mantapas. I also went into the rural areas and found out that there are Mantapas. And these are the public spaces. These are the public spaces designed hundreds of years ago with the purpose that it can be utilized by the public for free. Let's say a migrant coming to a city and wants to set up a stall or sit somewhere, do the cooking, then there are mantapas which are available. I found that feature to be really great and appreciable. And so these are the 2 sharings. And also one part of it is that in Pune, also there are kattes. Kattes is a common feature when there is a tree. We Indians also believe in tree spirits, and number of rituals are there around the trees also. So kattes is a common feature across India. But kattes in Pune are 1/8 probably size of what kattes that you see in Bangalore. It's broad and nice, and the stone also, which is local stone available here, is another feature to it, which helps making these kattes. So this is sharing. Now 2 questions. The first about the Ashwath kattes. I want to know how government, how these spaces are demarcated in the plans. Are these religious spaces? Are these common amenities sites? Ashwath kattes I'm talking about. So that is my first question. And the second question is about food growing spaces. So there are a number of voids and open spaces, and especially city like Bangalore, which has got still, there are in the BBMP limits probably 120 lakes which are there. So there is a source of water. The soil here and weather conditions are favorable. There are the amount of rainfall which is here is also very good. So what is that? Like, why there are no food or medicinal plants or something greens which fetch value in the market are not being harvested in these spaces? That's it. That is the second question. Thank you.
So shall we start with your second question? And I'm going to ask if our panelists have any responses.
Actually, what you're talking about, this urban agriculture thing, it's been practiced in this country in many places. Like, for instance, again in Hyderabad, all the lakes are artificial lakes, yeah? And they're seasonal, yeah? So during the dry season, the lake beds are given out in an arrangement called Sikkampatta, yeah? Which are meant for cultivation, yeah? But what happened in several places is that the word Sikkim disappeared from the revenue records, and they were called patta lands, yeah, and sold out, yeah. But that was the original thing. Now this green Hyderabad, Sikkim patta. Yeah. So the other thing was that this Green Hyderabad project revived this whole thing. And what you're talking about, medicinal herbs and things like that, they used these vacant lands, especially next to lakes, yeah, and to grow these herbs and other things. And then it's really the women who tended them and looked after them. That was one thing. The second thing is that the railways, the Indian Railways, has this practice of leasing land along the tracks for cultivation, yeah? So for instance, you arrive in a city like Visakhapatnam, you would be welcomed by all these, brinjals growing and things like that, all these vegetables over there. So this practice has been there. But it's really been taken up officially very extensively in some African countries, as well as in Europe, yeah? And especially now, this whole, because of the pandemic, yeah, that growing food locally has also become internationally another thing which should be looking at. So I think, thank you very much for hitting on that very valid point, where we should be looking at urban agriculture and local food production so that it doesn't have to be, and this concern also with climate change and food miles and things like that, these spaces. And sometimes you don't need huge spaces, yeah? Like again in Vijayawada, there was a resettlement project on which what we did is gave seeds for beans and, pumpkin and things like that to people who would, make these trellises outside. And that also provided shade during the summer, and plus vegetables to grow there. So I think a lot more needs to be done in cities to encourage that kind of thing happening.
In Bangalore, we have a history of lakes, which is different. Because of the LDA coming in and defining lakes as always filled with water, all these, we used to grow paddy in Hebbar Lake. There was rice cultivation, and it was traditional. But after the coming of the LDA and the Lake Development Authority and the Committee on Lakes and recommendations and all that, as a part of the urban plan, and also the clean sewage water was let into these lakes. So there have been so many multiple planning activities that the lakes have kind of gone away from the diverse use. Now they're just, if you Hebbar Lake at least is still natural. If you go to the next lake, it's that one Nagwara is completely like a water park, right? Yeah. So it's changed. But I think there is an organization in Bangalore that's encouraging urban agriculture. Rooftop agriculture is becoming popular.
I just want to add here.
Why it is not, Bangalore has a great history also about experimentation with plants, trees, Lalbagh being there. Best of the minds who have worked about the plants are here. And why this has not been tried is a kind of a
No, I think I just want to share here again. One of the speakers in yesterday's panel, Harini Nagendra, she along with Seema Mandoli, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that book. There's their recent book called Nature in the City. It does talk about this a bit. So that would be one very good source. Yeah, they have been dwelling on that. I'm not sure if we can take any more questions. Are we one or two questions? Yes, no? No, we can't take. Okay, I'm just going to very quickly answer. Some Ashwath Kattes are within temple premises. So those fall within something that's marked on the plan, but most of the others are not part of any formal plan. No, I think we have to close because we are, and I'm sorry, some of you had more.
The tree will be with the forest department, but Katte doesn't belong to anybody.
Katte belongs to the road.
They will say steal away if they want, they can steal away.
Yeah, make it road wide.
Make it road wide.
So it falls under the unplanned space. Yeah, now over to Asha to close.